Good evening, everybody. I think we're going to make a start. Thank you. So welcome to this meeting of the Companies Advisory Committee. There is no fire alarm planned for this evening. Should the alarm sound, please leave via the nearest available emergency exit. Two of the closest exits are through the glass door behind you to my left and through the double doors onto the riverside behind you. Please muster at the Café des Amis. Members of the public are welcome to make their own recordings of this meeting using whatever non-disruptive methods they think are suitable. I'd also like to remind everybody present that this meeting is being filmed and made available to view in live and archive form via the Council's website. If you are seated in a public gallery, it is possible that the cameras may capture your image. And if you wish to avoid being filmed, it is recommended you make a member of staff aware so you can direct you where to sit. Right. This meeting is also being minuted. And the Westgate garden gates on the river side are locked, so members of the public must leave the Guildhall by the side exit behind the glass door. Have we got any apologies for absence this evening?
We have no apologies, Chair.
Do we have any substitute members?
We have no substitute members, Chair.
Any declarations of interest?
None received in advance.
Are there any declarations that want to be made now?
Yeah.
Have Marie?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Director of Konenko.
Okay, There's more.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a Director of Partnership One.
No more for no more.
Bill?
No.
So this is Graham. Just to say I'm a Director of Stour Environmental Credits.
Okay, we had some public participation to confirm that there is one public speaker this evening who will speak immediately before the relevant item. So item agenda number 5 is the minutes of the previous meeting. Can we confirm that the minutes of this previous meeting are a true record by general assent?
Agreed.
Yep, that's agreed.
Yeah.
Thank you. Right. Item agenda number 6 then, the Council Companies Oversight Report. This is to note the report from the Head of Corporate Governance, Matthew Archer.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Yes, I put this report together because I thought it would be helpful just to set the scene for the role of this committee, because it's now changed a little from when we first created it, in that we had one company then, and we now have 3 companies to oversee as a council. And I think it changes the dynamic of the committee a little, and it gives you a new role as the overseer of all of the council companies. And so one of the things that we thought would be very helpful to do tonight was to just give a summary of your role, to make sure that that's clear, and also an opportunity to introduce you to the 2 new companies so that you have a bit more background about what they're about, and we can start to build that relationship between the companies and you as the committee members. So within the governance arrangements for a council company, it's very important that the company has the freedom to operate, but at the same time it's also important that the council has sufficient controls in place to protect its investment and also to protect its reputation too, and obviously the quality of the service that is being delivered by the companies on the council's behalf. Your role as a committee is also as well to assess whether the vehicle that we have for delivering the services delivered by the companies is the right vehicle, and if you have any reason to sort of challenge or question that, then you can flag that to Cabinet, and there can be a discussion. Each company has its own board of directors, as you will have heard tonight, and you've got representatives from each of the companies here on that. So we are effectively twin-hatted in the roles that we perform. When we are directors of the company, obviously we're acting in the best interests of the company, and then we have separately our officer roles, which we perform separately on behalf of the council. We also have, sorry, missed a point there. the council is the shareholder for each of those companies, and the cabinet fulfills the role of shareholder on behalf of the council, because cabinet is responsible for the delivery of the services within each of the three companies, and as a result, it then has the final say. We have a lead officer for each of the companies. They perform the client role officer to officer between the council and representatives of the company. So we have Nikki Mills here, who is the client officer and lead for both Partnership One and for Konenko. And on the Konenko side, supported by Sarah Randall, who's the lead contracts manager. And for Stour Environmental Credits, currently the lead officer would be the Joint Chief Executives. It's very much in its infancy, that company, and we will obviously assign somebody within the organisation if we need to beyond that, but we'll see what's needed. Good practice then recommends that the council should establish a company management committee to oversee the totality of the council's holdings, and that's the role that you have as a committee. You are the overseeing body, and the idea is that you are advisory. You're an advisory committee to Cabinet, reporting directly to them, and to sort of coin a phrase, that means that our oversight of our companies then is more than merely an agenda item on a cabinet agenda. It's deeper than that. It's you being able to do that deeper dive, gain an understanding, build a relationship with our companies to make sure that they are fulfilling their role as well as they can be. Your role will be to review the business plans for the three companies. Obviously, you've got one here tonight to look at with Konenko, and you will also once a year review what we term company health, which is making sure that the quality assurance and compliance and the financial stability of the company is all as it should be and is reported to you, and that you are satisfied that things are running well and as they should be. And if you have any concerns about that, then obviously you have the opportunity to quiz the managing directors or chief executive officers and the client officers in a bit more detail because of your role here. The scrutiny committee do still have a role as well. Obviously, theirs is a broader role looking at the themes now that we have the new approach for our scrutiny committee. So under the environment theme, they would have the opportunity to look at the work of Stour Environmental Credits. And under the housing and services theme, that would also encapsulate the role of Partnership One and Konenko. So you can see that you smell burning. As long as it's not internal. I'll carry on. If we need to break, then all okay? Okay. All right. Yeah, so they obviously will have the opportunity to look at the performance and KPIs from the companies if they wish to, as part of their general oversight. And they also retain the power of call-in, obviously, for any decisions made by Cabinet. So that's really all I wanted to say by way of introduction, just to kind of set the scene for the role of the committee. I would now like to hand over to first Bill Hicks, in his capacity as a director of Stour Environmental Credits, and then to Mark Emery, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Partnership One, who will both then provide a short presentation about the work of their companies. Thank you.
Thank you and good evening. Just to introduce myself, my name is Bill Hicks. I'm Director of Place at the Council, but I'm speaking to you tonight as a Director of Stour Environmental Credits Limited, or SEC for short, much more of a manageable mouthful to say SEC. I'm one of the two directors from Canterbury City Council. My colleague is Cheryl Ireland, who isn't here this evening, who is the Head of Finance. I'm sure everybody here has probably heard of the issues of Stodmarsh and the nutrient neutrality issues that have been manifested through the issues at Stodmarsh and the impact that it's having on our district and indeed the wider catchment area for Stodmarsh. And one of the solutions we believe will be the ability for the Stour Environmental Credits Company to effectively impact in this area. So what is the company? It's a joint venture between Ashford Borough Council and ourselves at Canterbury, and is based very much on an existing model called, perhaps not surprisingly, the Norfolk Environmental Credits Company Limited, which has been existent for 3 years now and is actually providing a very similar job up in Norfolk. The company will act in a very separate way, as it says there, to the local planning authorities, and that's quite deliberate, and I'll go on to say why in a moment. But essentially it is a nutrient trading platform, and that's looking at both established ways of creating nutrient mitigation as well as developing ones. And just to emphasise to everybody that we really are at the beginning of our journey in this area. This is very much cutting edge, new development of nutrient neutrality across the country. And we at Stodmarsh are very much at the front of that queue. The company itself, the platform, will buy that mitigation benefits from mitigation providers. And then we will sell credits to developers to enable them to develop housing. Basically, we will use a government source of funding called the Local Nutrient Mitigation Fund, the LNMF, which was awarded in 2 waves of funding back in 2023 by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, when they bestowed £57 million on a number of authorities. We received £9.8 million here, that money being held by Kent County Council. So there is very much an active financial footing for what we're doing here, which allows us to continue with these mitigation developments. This is a page, just a snapshot from the website. So there is a website that is now up and running. I suppose the key thing that I just wanted to say here without reading directly from it is that although the company is formed with Ashford and Canterbury, the Stour catchment area actually runs much wider and affects other local authorities in East Kent. So Folkestone and indeed Maidstone and a few others are impacted, but to a significantly lesser degree than we are, which is why with Ashford and Canterbury coming together, we really are the drivers in terms of where that impact needs to be mitigated. So why did we establish SEC? Well, there were always 3 options in terms of what we could do going forward. One was just to rely on the private market itself. A second option would have been to look at local authority delivery. And the third was to create an arm's length company. And we've done that third option. The market will still do what the market does, and that's fine. The local authority delivery was always going to be questionable because some of the sums involved for some of the nutrient mitigation are very significant, tens of millions of pounds. And this is where people are looking to develop wetlands and other areas where there is land purchase and very significant outlays of large amounts of money. So in many respects, it made sense to keep away from local authorities and being delivered through local authorities. So an arm's length company was obviously a solution. So it now allows us to give a holistic response to the problem. It is a non-for-profit organisation, but it allows us, as it says there, to be masters of our own destiny. So we're removed from those long-term liabilities, which a local authority would otherwise have to pick up, and allows us to look at a catchment-wide solution rather than a local authority solution for a catchment-wide problem. And that enables us to streamline the process that we can go forward with. And again, just to give some scale of the issues confronted by the Stodmarsh situation, across the whole catchment area, it's estimated over 7,000 houses have been held up from development because of the nutrient neutrality issues. And indeed, within our district alone, it's around 2,000 houses have been held up through Stodmarsh. So the figures are significant, and the impact, therefore, is very great indeed. So how does it work? Well, as I say, we are a non-for-profit trading company which secures those large-scale mitigation or offsetting parameters for both phosphorus and nitrogen, and they're the two key areas that we need to focus on. The offset is sold to developers in credits with all the necessary supporting documents to enable them to secure planning permission. And that's obviously assuming that the only issues that's holding back that development is nutrient neutrality and that there aren't other planning issues involved. The mitigation itself is secured and guaranteed for a minimum of 80 years, which is the sort of government definition in this situation of perpetuity. And then the credits are purchased before the grant of the planning permission. So it's basically the same as carbon trading, which currently goes on. But SEC doesn't permanently own or deliver that offset, but it trades it. And our expectation is, and we're still at the beginning of this journey, but we estimate that we will probably meet around 40% of market demand, with the rest being met by that private sector element that I mentioned earlier on. So this is the process in terms of how that mitigation is actually incorporated. There will be a lot of pre-feasibility work, which will be looking at the various locations, the amount of demand and the value for money for that work. We would then move into a feasibility phase where we would do a peer review of those mitigation approaches, which would include discussion with stakeholders who are involved in our process, such as Natural England, the Environment Agency, and other board directors. We would need to seek endorsement by Natural England, as they are so intrinsically involved in the understanding of nutrient neutrality and mitigation. We'd also obviously get the endorsement from the local planning authorities involved. And importantly, we've got a very strong technical working group that is made up of scientific environmental advisors from the Environment Agency, Natural England, from water companies and the local authorities to really give the rigour to the science that needs to be done in order to make sure that this mitigation is effective and long-lasting. This picture really just shows the sort of what's called the portfolio approach to spreading the risk, cost and delivery, securing a mix of grey and green mitigation solutions, grey being storm water, gullies, drains, that sort of thing, as opposed to green more in terms of the environmental wetlands or other opportunities in this area. But it's aiming to, in due course, provide a consistent price point across the catchment for those nutrient credits to developers. So that's enabling them to plan what they need to do to ensure their viability, but also ensure that there are enough credits to do what developers and others want to propose to do. Its governance and legality is secured in a very robust way, and it is backed, as I mentioned, by that detailed scientific evidence and signed off by local planning authorities and Natural England. So it really is a robust approach to the solution. So we are looking to prioritise mitigation that delivers certainty quickly, maximises those credits, minimises ongoing liability and maintenance, and offers that geographic flexibility, bearing in mind that this is a catchment issue and not an individual district issue. And where are we now? I mentioned that we are pretty young. The company was only formed back in December. We have recently undertaken some soft market testing, which means we've gone out to the market to look at their response to what they could offer for this mitigation process. and we will review that based on a prioritisation of those elements I mentioned in the previous slide, i.e. the ability to deliver those credits quickly, to deliver them in a plentiful enough way to meet the requirements of the market, and to minimise ongoing liability and maintenance issues. So following that initial consideration, we had about 10 people apply through that soft market test approach. It is now sitting with our technical working group who are doing a detailed scientific analysis of those mitigation processes. As a public company and being subject to public procurement, we will go through the due process channels to award a contract in due course when all this consideration has been taken into account. Worth noting also that we have an advertisement out currently in the marketplace live for a managing director for the company, and in due course I would see them coming along here and giving you the business update in a more detailed way than probably I'm giving to you now. And along with that, you know, we very shortly hope to come back to you and others to give an idea of the timescale of those credits to be delivered to the market. And our expectation is that we're talking months here for those credits to be delivered, not longer, which will hopefully start to give at least an initial relief to the existing issues that the Stodmarsh situation presents to us. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that. Can I just ask, we now have Mark Emery, who is the Chief Executive Partnership One. If you want us to say a little bit? Thanks. Alistair? You will, yeah.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Emery. I'm the Chief Exec of Partnership One. So to launch in, so who are we? So obviously we're a local authority trading company, and unlike some of the other companies, we're jointly owned by Canterbury, Dover and Thanet. So each council owns 33% of the company. And effectively we deliver the revenues and benefits and customer services functions of all three councils. So across East Kent, there's some metrics there. There's around 350,000 customer contacts a year, of which Canterbury is about 160,000 of that. We collect around £320 million in council tax, of which 110 million is for Canterbury, 122 million in business rates, which is 47 million for Canterbury. We pay around 90 million in benefits, 36 million in council tax support, and award about £1 million in discretionary awards. That's across East Kent. So it's quite high volume, very transactional environment. So we've got about 190 in our team, so it's just under 200 in the company. And as we're a local authority trading company, any surplus that we make is then made available to the councils to reinvest in their own services. So just for a little bit of background about how we've reached the point. So effectively, I think we're about 16 years into a sort of a shared service model. So it started off revenues, benefits and customer services was each delivered by each of the three authorities. Then in 2012, the councils formed East Kent Services, of which revenues, benefits and customer services was added along with IT and HR and services like that. So within the revenues and benefits area and customer services area of EK Services, we were about 230 people. It was a more traditional shared service model, and we were effectively tasked with achieving 20% savings, which was primarily through reduction in management capacity and absorption of all costs. And in today's terms, our cost base was around 11 million. But ultimately, the business model failed because we weren't able to absorb all the cost increases at that point. So in 2018, the areas in scope were outsourced to Civica under a commercial outsourcing arrangement. We transferred all 230 staff into there, and Civica effectively commercialised the service, transformed it, and we were left with around 180 people running the core service, and 50 people were moved into other services, so there were no redundancies involved. there was a strong focus on staff engagement, commercial working practices, and transformation. And in current money, the service was running at around £9 million, and that enabled a reduction in the contract price to the councils, and also enabled for a profit margin to be made by Civica. Ultimately, Civica exited what we would call the BPO market because it's a software company, and discussions began a couple of years ago about how to return the service. So the councils decided to make the most of the commercialisation that had happened over the last 7 years and created Partnership One. So effectively where we are now, 1st of February, everyone moved across into the new company. We are 190 staff, just over. We're slightly more because we've absorbed some additional services, which I shall explain in a moment. And effectively what the councils have taken advantage of is by keeping the contract price the same with Partnership One as it was with Civica, it's enabled us to absorb a significant seven-figure sum of additional services, which then present savings back to the authorities. So on day one, we're delivering the service at the same cost, but the councils are making a saving. So obviously why a shared model? Because one of the options was to return the service and split us up between the authorities to retain control. But obviously there are some significant structural efficiencies and economies of scale in sharing services, and the standardisation of processes enables us to effectively make our widgets more efficiently. But specifically why a LATCO model? Frankly, because we can generate income. There's unlike a shared service model, we can trade commercially should the board allow it. There's a greater agility of decision making. There's a more commercial culture. Effectively, it's called profit with a purpose. And in this case, it was actually the staff desire to go down the LATCO model rather than return to the services in return to the councils in a more traditional form. So this is quite a busy slide, but just to give us a little bit of idea about what we do. So we've got 18 contractual KPIs across across all three authorities, 6 for each, and it's very much about balancing the quality or the speed of the service or the effectiveness of the service against the quality and the impact on the residents and the customers. So you'll see here. One of them is how quickly do we process benefit claims, but equally how accurately do we process benefit claims. So pleased to say that we're significantly ahead of our expectations in both of those areas. Likewise in customer services, how quickly do we answer calls against how satisfied are the customers? And again, we're significantly ahead of our KPIs on that. The ones that are, you'll notice in red, around collection. So that's effectively council tax collection. We're measured on how much money we get in the door as at the 31st of March. So we're all aware of the macro environmental challenges and the cost of living challenges that some of our residents are facing. So it would be no surprise that we're actually currently about 1% down on our expectations. Business rates is equally challenging, but we're just coming in on target on that. But we don't just measure ourselves against the contract and the KPIs. There's a number of other metrics that we use. So following on from the money in the door as at the 31st of March, one of the things that we also look at is how much money do we ultimately collect. So what we refer to as our ultimate collection rates would be over about 6 years. And so for council tax, I have to collect 97.39% in year. But actually over about 6 years, I collect 99%. So that, as a tax methodology, is actually quite progressive and very successful. What that approach enables me to balance with my team is the ethical collection that's really important, because actually what that enables us to say is to identify cases where there is a vulnerability or there is difficulty paying and stretch those instalments over a slightly longer period. Because actually it's what ultimately comes in that's important, not necessarily the timing of when that money comes in. So in addition to ultimate collection rates, we also measure ourselves against customer feedback and complaints and escalated inquiries. So against a backdrop, for example, in the year to date of around 600,000 customer interactions, we've actually had 180 complaints or MP inquiries or council inquiries, of which 25 of those we've actually looked at, well, we've looked at all of them, but 25 of those have resulted in a process change where we've looked at it and thought we could have done better. So every one of those goes back through a feedback loop to actually improve the service. So whilst 25 would personally like it to be lower, I think against the backdrop of the 600,000 customer transactions, that puts it in perspective and helps reinforce the picture of a quality service. I've mentioned as well about the ethical collection and the need to identify vulnerabilities. So we work very closely with our enforcement agents, for example, and effectively at the first hint of an unidentified vulnerability, we would pull back the case from any enforcement action and work with the customer to try and reach a more acceptable collection methodology, which again feeds into that ultimate collection rate rather than the money in the door at the 31st of March. And finally, their staff engagement. I'm personally quite passionate about that element. An engaged workforce is critical to the health of the company. There's effectively a metric called Employer Net Promoter Score, which is used fairly commonly through different sectors, and you effectively you survey your staff and you come up with a numeric score. A good score is generally considered between 10 and 30, and on our last assessment, which was around 3 months ago, we were 23, so we're very much towards the better end of good, but I want to improve that further, so I'm committed to working with the team and improving that engagement. Just a little bit about our management model and feeding on a little bit from what Matthew was saying earlier. So effectively, the way that the operations of the company are managed and monitored are the 3 councils have delegated their services to the East Kent Services Committee, which is effectively the leaders. There's the company board. So the company board is made up of 3 directors, one from each council. Matthew is Canterbury's representative. The company board directly deal with the company management team, which is effectively myself and my leadership team. We then deal with the client management of the client officer, and so in terms of the client management and the day-to-day elements of how the contract is running, the service is running. That feeds through into the contract management board, which is all 3 151, so Nicky Mills sits on that contract management board, and that's the place for a much more scrutiny and challenge around service operations and performance. Then we have the relationship between that group and this group. So at Canterbury, there is the company's advisory committee, so there's another level of challenge, and then ultimately that feeds through into the cabinet, who are the ultimate owners and decision makers. So I think Matthew probably explained it in better detail than I did on that one.
No, thank you, all 3 of you, for your reports there. I'd just like to apologise if I don't see anyone. I've got the wrong glasses on, so I can only see about that telescreen, and the rest of you are a blur. So, yeah, I could just open it up to questions from members, please. And Councillor Brady, you can start.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I want to come back to the Stour Environment Company, if I may. I want to ask a question on outcomes, process and sustainability. So you understand that it's being set up to tackle the Studmarsh issue, and there's 7,000 houses that are being held up by that. So that's one outcome, it's house building delivery. Now, I hope the other outcome is to benefit the Studmarsh situation. So the immediacy is not making it worse, but how are we monitoring that we're going to make that situation better with less pollutants, and what time frame are we thinking on that? On process, you mentioned that credits are bought before it goes to the planning committee. Now, how are we getting in front of the interpretation from the developer that they've bought credits, so they think that that gives them more of an advantage for the planning committee to accept that development? We understand that they need them for the planning committee to accept that, but it shouldn't be taken as a given that because they have them, then that development will be accepted for X, Y, and Z. And on sustainability, you said there's a 50 million pot nationally. It's going to be spread out locally, and part of that money will be going to credits and be paid for mitigation, and the circular bit of that on sustainability, because then those credits will come back and there will be a pot that's regenerated. But out of that pot, staffing levels will need to be paid for. So how long, there's a finite pot that we don't know that's going to be getting topped up by government. So how long do we have the burn rate of that with our staffing levels to be able to operate in a sustainable manner? Do we think it's a decade, or is it shorter than that? And if it's shorter than that, are we hoping to alleviate the problem by a certain time frame? Thank you.
Okay, there's a lot packed in there, and I'll try and answer the questions as I can remember. With regards to your first point, you're absolutely right. Of course, I've focused very much on the commercial, the delivery of housing as one of the key objectives. The Stour Environmental Credits Company is very much it's purely a trading company to provide credits to enable housing to happen. We work hand in glove with the Environment Agency, with Natural England. We're very conscious through working with them very closely that this is much wider in terms of the solution to the Stod Marsh issue itself. And as you correctly say, Councillor Brady, at the moment, a lot of this is just based on getting a neutral level of from where we are now, rather than actually improving the situation. So we know that any mitigation that we're going to have to do in the longer term actually betters where we are now, and that will be part of the aims and objectives of what we're trying to do as part of the macro point, of which we're just one small piece of that overall pie. So we'll continue to work with those agencies, with the water companies, with everybody else to make sure that happens. It's probably also worth pointing out that we are doing this now conscious that there may well be changes in 3, 5, 10 years' time. We know, for example, that government has already spoken about the Nature Restoration Fund. There's very little detail on this yet, and the plan would be that developers would pay into a larger pot that would deliver much larger infrastructure benefits that would affect in a more significant way what's happening in the catchment areas. So as I say, that may well come on stream in a period of time, which may actually say, therefore, that the SEC doesn't need to provide what it's doing because of these other bigger plays that are happening. However, in the meantime, because this new play from government will be several years down the road, we think that there is still an opportunity for us to break the log jam and start moving the whole situation much further forward in the immediate short term. So that's something that we want to do. Forgive me, I've forgotten some of your other points.
Outcomes process, sorry, the purchase of credits before planning application.
Yes, and to be absolutely clear, we need to completely nail down the process that will happen, and we will work very closely both with the local planning authority, with the relevant governance bodies to make sure everything is correct. Because to your point, just because someone buys a credit doesn't necessarily mean that they will get an automatic planning permission approved. So there needs to be checks and balances in there, and there will be, so that it's perhaps, and here I'm talking in a conjectural way, but it might be that they put a deposit on a credit, which once they get planning permission, then they are unable to buy. You know, there's a whole process that we need to think through. And in addition, we need to give regard to those developers that might buy credits, but then perhaps don't deliver the housing and therefore take credits out of the market, which stop other people. So there are a number of those different sort of work streams that we just need to work through. It's in play in Norfolk already, as I've mentioned. So a lot of this mitigation is already being sorted out, but we just need to make sure that it is catchment specific for us and is the right way to do it. And again, I would hope that we would come here and update you in how that unfolds in the coming weeks and months.
Sustainability of the funding pot with staffing levels.
Yes,
and burn rate.
and again, a good point. Thank you for the prompt. There will be a very small administrative fee included within the cost of the credits. We are a not-for-profit and we're not looking to make any money on those profits, but there will be a small administrative fee that will cover all of those eventualities. So the idea is that it is self-sustaining and that as the credits get sold, the company can continue for as long as they're required to be.
Then I ask questions on Partnership 1.
You can do, but
Okay, sorry.
Councillor Turnbull, go for next. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I had similar sort of questions really to Alistair's, but of course he's put them far more eloquently than I would have done. But yes, it's the benefits to Stodmarsh. And is it that you're sort of, I don't quite understand how it's going to work in practice, I think, and maybe that's just not entirely clear yet. Is it a matter of identifying actions that will benefit the region and the catchment area, and then they are sort of bought into that, you know, there's pots of money required for these actions, and the developers will contribute towards those? Is that, am I getting anywhere near it? I mean, presume all the money's going towards this particular problem at this surrounding the Stodmarsh.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's right, Councillor Turnbull. I mean, the money that's generated will pay for mitigation so that the situation in Stodmarsh, at very least, does not deteriorate, but in an ideal world will be planned to get better in the future, so that the creation of credits through things such as septic tank upgrades, water flow restrictors, which will stop the amount of water being used by people, not in a negative sense, but by a small reduction in the flow of water into people's houses. They use less water, which uses less energy, which therefore reduces their bills, but still allows them to provide all the activities that they need to in their houses. So there are a number of these mitigations that create phosphorus and nitrate credits, which can then be used to allow building to happen to counteract any negative impact that would have happened in the Stodmarsh area, in that catchment. So in the short term, it's nutrient neutrality, in that it is really just making sure that things do not deteriorate, but the goal will be to improve the situation in Stodmarsh and indeed other areas similarly affected across the country, so that in fact their nutrient neutrality situation improves rather than stays exactly as it is at the moment.
Thank you, that's a bit clearer.
Councillor Jupe, did you?
Yeah, sorry to usurp you, Alistair, but it's about the Stour. Can I just check if it's going to go through planning? There's not going to be any bonus that they get from planning for buying credits through the LATCO.
Bonus in what sense, Councillor?
In terms of, they're not going to be seen as, it's not going to prejudice planning. It's like we've bought this, therefore from you, therefore you're going to give us planning.
No,
Probably
not at
the
all.
worst way of putting this, but yeah.
No, absolutely not. I mean, planning applications will still be judged on their own individual merits. This will just be one factor that will allow them to come forward in those catchment areas within the district that are subject to that nutrient neutrality requirements for Stodmarsh. I mean, it's worth noting that there are lots of areas within our district that are not impacted by Stodmarsh, up near the coast, some areas of Herne Bay, places like that. And so this is, this does not impact them in any way, shape or form, but it will just be one component part of a planning application that comes forward from people in that Stodmarsh catchment area to mitigate the downsides from that nutrient neutrality piece through the building and developments that they're planning to do. Not at this point, no. No.
Have we got any more questions about the Stour thing first, and then we'll move on to the partnership? We'll just do it at the time, if that's okay. Councillor Turnbull?
Thank you. Yeah. So they buy the credits. If they don't get planning permission, they've still bought the credits, or is they conditional on them getting planning permission?
I mean, I think, as I mentioned, I think a lot of that detail, that process needs to just be hammered down. I mean, I think, one thing that I certainly wouldn't want to do is to tie up credits that aren't going to get used one way or another. That's not useful for anybody, in terms of residents and businesses' requirements in the district. It's also not good for developers to sit on these things. So we need to develop mechanisms that allow them to sort of nominate themselves to get credits, but that aren't committed or bought until the full planning permission is given, so that it's that the planning permission is judged on its own merits, not because of the availability or the supply of credits on their own.
Thanks for that. I just have a couple of questions there about this sort of thing as well. So in my sort of little mind, it sort of reminds me a bit of like a pre-application, pre-planning application, was the developer would you would sort it, the developer and yourselves would sort it out with these credits, and you'd get the application almost there, but before it went to any sort of committee to be approved, so it would never be approved, and then you'd have like a sub-planning committee that would then monitor the delivery of this, as like they do like this 106, and it would work along them sort of lines.
Yes, I think that's right. And, you know, one of the back office systems that will need to be developed, and again, there are now companies that do provide this, and it is in the market. We'll show you what credits you've got potentially coming through, where they are allocated, how they are monitored, because I mentioned that 80-year life cycle period. So there needs to be obviously a constant monitoring of their performance and their effective delivery of what they're said to do, which developers naturally will want to have, given that they will be paying, you know, relatively large sums of money for each house for each of this mitigation.
Okay, thanks. And then secondly, about when you sell the credits or the developers buy it, will they be people coming in who are out of the catchment area? Because obviously some developers won't have any on-site mitigation places that they can buy credits. So would you obviously at a higher price, or would you really just want to keep it within this catchment?
I mean, I think at this stage we'd want to keep it within the catchment. I think. I mean, there has to be I think a sensible approach from a catchment perspective, in that, you know, our partnership with Ashford means when the requisite number of credits are required by either party, there is an ebb and flow of how that will work. It's not divided that everything will be exactly 50-50. If Canterbury have got relevant developments coming forward, it may be that, you know, the lion's share of credits go to Canterbury, or vice versa. That will depend on the flow of applications that come through.
Thanks for that. So I think Councillor Brady, Councillor Turnbull. Thank you.
Sorry, it is on this one. I think it does apply to the other one slightly as well, but no, probably most of this one, and it's probably for Matthew as much as you. It's so this is obviously in very early stages, and you're not at in the position of, well, even having recruited an MD yet. What do we see as a committee? Do we get the business plans? Do we see the business plans, or is our role just the monitoring of those plans, and the responsibility for agreeing the plans is, because you're saying that we're kind of like a sort of scrutiny-ish role, critical friend for Cabinet. Do we therefore advise them or whatever, support them in their decision making on the business planning, in the business planning process, or is it just the monitoring later on? Thanks.
Yes, so you will get the business plan, and in the same way that you're seeing the Kanenko business plan tonight, it's partly a backward look and also then a forward look to how things have gone and how what's planned for the following year. Conventionally, you would see that once a year at the point where it's brought forward for the year for annual approval. I think with something like the Star environmental credits, where it's so new and evolving, if there is a need to bring an interim report back to update the committee on anything specific, or if there is something perhaps on its way through to Cabinet where it would be useful to have the insight for you first, then I'm sure we can arrange special meetings to cover that. There is a degree of experimentation with this. I mean, as it is, we would expect 2 meetings per year to cover the corporate health and the business plan, and then if we need more, we'll arrange more.
Okay, thanks for all of that. So, Mark, I think it's going to be your turn for questions now. So, Partnership 1 questions? Brady.
Thank you. First, I need to register a pecuniary interest as a Kent County Councillor. I didn't realise I didn't have sight of the slides. But there's a mention of council tax, and I'm going to ask a question on that. It's understood that at KCC, the council tax collection grant is proposed to be cut. We're seeing a KPI that there was a impact on the council tax collection from 31st of March of 1% drop. Just wondering what impact you think that might have moving forward. And then my second question is on the revenue generated by the LATCO. I'm just wondering, is that to create a profit? If it is, where do the profits go? Does that stay within Partnership One? And then you utilise that fund, or does it come back to the local authority? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In relation to the Kent County Council funding, which is being cut from this year, effectively what the councils use that for is, so that funding goes directly to the councils use that to fund effectively the contract price with the LATCO. The reduction of that funding this year does put a strain in each authority, and we'll be working with all the 151s to work out exactly how does this need to be dealt with, how can we mitigate the challenges as much as possible. I think undoubtedly, if there is a reduction in funding that does translate into a reduction in resources, that would impact the collection rate to a certain degree. It's a little bit unquantifiable at the moment, but ultimately, if Kent County Council are cutting funding and we reduce our resources, KCC will be the major loser of that income. But my intention is to mitigate that as much as possible and work with Nikki on a plan to how we can achieve that. But it certainly is likely to have an impact. Okay. In relation to the profit element, so subject to any trading activity, any surplus that the company makes in its normal trading for its revenues and benefits with the three councils is not subject to corporation tax. Anything that we trade externally is subject to corporation tax, but overall the intention is that any profits that we make after tax would be returned to the councils in the funding percentages. So effectively, whilst each council owns 33% of the company, the funding of the company is not 33% because it's based on activity and different caseloads. So the intention would be that any surplus would be returned to the councils in that funding percentage to be made available to fund other local services.
No one else? Okay, I will ask a couple of things. So if there's changes in like the universal credit and all the sort of the means tested benefits, I mean, is that going to put you under a bit of pressure for a while? Are you sort of ready to go with any changes? You know, like you were talking about people, obviously with council tax and being on different levels and having that social ethical responsibility, it's obviously going to push you a little bit, maybe.
Yes, any legislative change is always going to generate the potential for challenge. What we do is we're quite well placed within the leadership team. So there are members of the team who sit on advisory committees for the DWP. I sit on an advisory committee with MXCLG. So we do have, I suppose, a higher level or ability to have a higher level understanding of what may be coming down the road. And actually, we do a lot of planning in terms of service planning and resource planning to try and meet those challenges. So when, so for example, universal credit, the way that universal credit works, it presents a challenge in our council tax support scheme. So we revised our council tax support scheme a couple of years ago to cater for that. And then as the welfare landscape changes, we'll continue to evolve.
And then just finally about the, obviously, bailiffs and enforcement officers, are they directly contracted with you, or do you subcontract out sort of bailiffs and enforcement? And when if things like this happen, do you try and call the residents rather than write to them, or is that not possible because of the amount of calls you might have to make?
So we have we're contracted. We have a contract with first placement and second placement enforcement agents. The first placement enforcement agents that we've used for the last 7 years. and I can legitimately say that the number of complaints I've had about them, I can count on one hand in that 7-year period. So they're very good at identifying that level of vulnerability. Hand on heart, I think the volumes are often too high to phone, but what we do as a service is that we've introduced, ever since COVID, a number of additional touch points with the customer. So we've reintroduced second reminders. We've introduced SMS prompts that actually they're in debt. We've introduced at 2 different stages additional instalment options for customers, so that even because we identified that there was an embarrassment in phoning up about identifying and arranging a special arrangement. So we do that automatically and say, if you do this, you won't hear from us again. So there's a number of additional touch points that we try and do, but ultimately, if the enforcement agents do identify any vulnerability, it gets pulled straight away, and we engage with the National Debt Advice Service and things like that. So
It's really good to hear. Thank you for that. Oh, thank you all, everybody, for their reports.
Yeah.
We're going to have to note this by general assent, if we can. Yep, thank you. Yeah, so yeah, thank you once again for all that. We're just going to have a little minute while everyone swaps seats. Okay, so we're going to move on to item number 7, which is the Canterbury Environment Company Service Delivery Plan for 2025-26. We've got one public speaker for this item, which is Sian Petman, and if you'd like to come up, if you could, please, and you've got 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
I have asked to speak tonight as I have 2 questions in relation to street cleansing. For several weeks last summer, we had a situation in which many of the litter bins in Canterbury's parks, streets and public spaces were left unemptied for days, if not weeks on end, resulting in large quantities of litter piling up around them. This was not only unsightly to tourists and residents alike, but it also posed a health hazard, as the food remains in the overflowing bins attracted an increasing number of rats and gulls. Individual residents, especially members of Friends of groups, such as Beverly, sitting over there, and myself, ended up repeatedly emptying the bins and bagging up the waste on Kanenko's behalf. When we raised the issue with the council, we were told that Kanenko's operatives had been redeployed to the coast and that there were staff shortages due to the summer holidays. Apparently, the litter problem on the coast did improve considerably when extra staff were deployed there, but Canterbury paid the price, and residents were left picking up the overspilling rubbish on Kanenko's behalf. So my first question to you this evening is, what provision is Kanenko making to ensure that we don't have a repeat of last year's summer street cleansing problems in Canterbury? I appreciate that budgets are tight, but it seems to me that Kanenko must aim to increase the size of its street cleansing team over the summer months to guarantee a consistent level of performance across the district and to ensure that staff absences due to summer holidays do not lead to performance failure. And this leads me to my second question. What level of performance can the public expect where the emptying of litter bins is concerned? I would ask you to look at Appendix 3 on the agenda of tonight's papers, which gives the KPIs for street cleansing. These KPIs, as shown, are totally meaningless to members of the public. They refer to a contract which is not published and to an unspecified percentage of street cleansing inspections. This means absolutely nothing. So in conclusion, I would appeal to you on two fronts. Firstly, to ensure that Kanenko makes proper provision for the litter season over the summer months across the district, so that it doesn't end up robbing Peter to pay Paul, as happened last year. And secondly, when you review Kanenko's service delivery plan this evening, to request an increase in the transparency and accountability of Kanenko's KPIs on street cleansing, so that we, as members of the public, can find out what we can realistically expect. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Chairs. Right. So, I'd just like to ask Sarah Randall, who's the Leeds Contracts Manager, to present your report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is one of two reports that come to the committee, as Matthew's mentioned in his presentation earlier. The health of the company came to the committee in November last year, and this is the annual service delivery plan for Kanenko for 25-26. The performance of the company, as Matthew also mentioned, will go to scrutiny, and currently it's looking at the committee in June from an email that I read earlier this evening. So the performance of the company will be taken to the scrutiny in June. So the service delivery plan gets written by David Maidman, who is the Managing Director of Kanenko. He submits it to the council in December, end of December, or early January, for us to review. Then we have a discussion about what's in and out of it, and then this presented today. He also takes it through his board as part of that sign-off process. So that's kind of the process of where we got to this year's, and it is the second one that you've seen. So you did see the 24-25 one last year. So it's written very much end of last year, but it tries to capture what was going on at the time and looks forward to the year that's coming up in 25-26. It covers the three contracts that Kanenko have. So it covers the waste collection and street cleansing, which is one contract, the grounds maintenance and associated works, which is the second contract, and they've been running those services since 2021, the waste since February that year, and the grounds since December that year. The public toilets is a new service they took over. They took over that in June 2024. So they've only been managing that 6-7 months to date. The service delivery plan covers the statutory requirements, which is the waste collection service, and the other statutory requirement, which is burials in the cemeteries. The majority of the other services are non-statutory. The government, just so that you're aware, are making some simpler recycling changes. So there are changes that are being implemented by government to commercial waste collections from March this year. Kanenko don't do any waste commercial collections, so it doesn't impact on their service. However, there are some changes that we will need to be doing by March 2026 in order to be compliant on the household waste collections. So we will be spending the next year making sure we are compliant. And the area that we are currently not compliant, if we were in the same position next March, is on the communal food waste collections. We currently do food waste collections to individual properties, but not communal properties, and we need to make sure that's in place by the end of next March next year. So, as I said, we will be working together to make sure that's in place. We've also been working very closely with colleagues working on the Luff project for the grounds maintenance, and that really will be having an impact over 25-26, linked to the improvements to some of the parks within Canterbury. As I've mentioned, the toilets are new. The council purchases all the fleet that Canenco use. So we actually purchase all the fleets. Everything that has a road licence is purchased by us. Any other equipment that doesn't have a road licence, plant and equipment, is purchased by Canenco. We work jointly on systems, working with the digital and system development team on the systems, and we work very closely with Partnership One as an organisation who take a lot of our customer care calls and that side of things. So we have regular meetings with Partnership One as well. The company is looking to continue with their ISO accreditation, and that's something that's important to them. And looking forward, continuing improvement, training and development of their staff, retaining the ISO, and looking at the system capability is key for the development of the services this year. And the other thing that we are currently waiting, we know the budgets have been approved for next year, but we're waiting for formal notification on what has been approved of the growth items that were submitted. And then we will work to look at the development of those services. Thank you. I'm just going to pass over to David, who's just going to look at questions on the side from the public speaker.
Thank you, Sarah. I think if I can address the first point with regard to what happened last summer, I think what the speaker tonight has highlighted some challenges that we had during 2024 with regarding to some resourcing levels. And I think firstly, before I go into a little bit more about that, just say thank you. We are very grateful to the work that the volunteer groups do. That's not necessarily just in the parks. There's a number of volunteer groups that work across the district, and they are extremely helpful and beneficial to the overall district, supporting the work that we do and the work that the council does. The LATCO, as you've heard from Mark, the LATCO model is there to deliver a level of flexibility. And I think what last year highlighted is that flexibility was challenged. It highlighted, and we recognise that the seasonal resources that are employed, and that has been very much a historical situation of one we inherited back in 2021 from the previous contractor, and we continue through, has a disproportionate focus to the coast, which then does leave areas of Canterbury exposed at certain times and peak periods. And again, that was probably highlighted at best last year. The speaker has highlighted in the sense that there are budgetary challenges. So in terms of what we can deliver and that resourcing model of what we can deliver, there are some challenges around that. And that led to the submission of a growth bid, which, as Sarah's confirmed, we're awaiting confirmation of. But we put a growth bid in for a seasonal resource for Canterbury Parks. We're just waiting confirmation on that. So we're optimistic and confident that that will lead to a significant improvement in terms of performance this year. But as I say, we're just waiting for confirmation on that. The second point in terms of the KPIs, I'm not sure if we want to sort of jointly answer this. I understand the point in terms of how meaningful they are to the public. I think in terms of the KPIs that we have within the contract, they are very, very typical to anything that we've worked for in previously to Canenco. So I think if there's a conversation around there, that's probably something that we need to take away. So.
And I think it's fair to say that we don't just work on KPIs. We do look at performance indicators at a lower level. We look at tracking, particularly things like play area, works and jobs. So they aren't KPIs, but they are performance indicators. And that was something that Mark picked up in his presentation as well. So they look at non-KPIs as a way of monitoring performance. And we have regular meetings as well to make sure that the performance of the company is providing the services the council needs. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks for all that, the report there and the extra answers. Before we go much further, I'd like to propose from the chair here that the Companies Advisory Committee recommend to Cabinet that the service delivery plan for waste collection and street cleansing, grounds maintenance, associated works and public convenience cleaning and maintenance for 2025-26 be approved. So I'm looking for a seconder for that.
I'll second that.
I can see you, thank you. And now, after that, we can open it up for some debate, some more debate. I think Councillor Brady got in just for you, Councillor Turnbull. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to quickly go back to the public speakers' questions. So, if there are issues this summer, how responsive are you going to be able to deal with that if you get phone calls or if you get this flagged up by councillors? How are we going to get in front of that issue if the mitigations that I've mentioned aren't satisfactory to deal with that? And then just on the KPIs, I think it's because within this documentation, Appendix 3, it's a high level. It doesn't give us the units, the figure, what the KPIs are. And you mentioned that they go to the scrutiny committee. I'm just wondering when they come to this committee, because we have oversight. So I'm going to go through you, Chair, to say, can we have a request that the KPIs come to this committee? Because we are companies committee, we have oversight and we should have oversight of performance. So it shouldn't just go to scrutiny. We should have oversight of the performance of the companies that we are looking at. So through you, maybe that's something that we can then look to address, because I don't want to be looking at Appendix 3 that tells me what a KPI is, what you're going to be measuring, and it doesn't have the unit figure, so I can then look at performance and then address if the plan is working. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sure someone's going to reply to that. Marie Royal will reply to that, just to make sure it's the remit of this committee.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a good point. Your role is a scrutiny role. You know, you've got oversight. I think we'll take that away and look at how we can enable that.
Shall I come back on the mitigation? We're optimistic in terms of the growth bid, but of course, I can't say that 100%. In terms of the mitigation, anything that does come in, we will respond and respond accordingly. I think the challenge we have is the aim of the growth bid is to turn it from a reactive response in terms of being proactive. So in the absence of, it will continue as more of a reactive type service. However, we are now aware of some of those issues, and therefore the monitoring of those locations needs to improve, and we will improve that, and that will become part of the first stage of the mitigation. The challenge with any litter bins, and it's the same challenge on the coast, is that there is such a variability. But as we know, and I can probably gauge the reaction by my public speaker colleagues over there, that the variability of that is not necessarily let out, but again, it is that budget challenge of the resource may not be required on certain days and certain times, which then comes back to the flexibility model of the LATCO. And I think we've got some other things that we need to look at just in terms of how we respond and how we communicate some of that response. So it is quicker when something is reported or when it comes in, be it either from a member of the public, be it even internally ourselves, of how we respond to that. And that's something else that we'll take away and have a look at. But there are some gaps there that we do need to close and be better on.
Yeah, just a little one there.
Can I just come, and I didn't have a third question and I forgot to ask it, but just on that, it sounds like there's known unknowns. We know there's going to be pockets of waste, so we need to be agile and we need to have responsive teams to get to that. I forgot to ask about the extended producer responsibility grant, and I'm just wondering what plans are there to utilise that, and are there talks with KCC also to have some plans of what they're going to be then passporting to us to be able to get in front of that. I understand they need to save some of the money because they think that Arlington, the venting issue, down the road, they'll have to spend more money there. But to get in front of that, then we need to look at better collection rates and separation rates. So I'm just wondering how we're working with the county authority also. Thank you.
Sorry, on our side of the grant, I've just had a quick confirmation that it's been set aside at the moment, and we're to look at that. With regard to the KCC money, we have regular Kent-wide officer group meetings, and we've had one recently, and they've made us aware that they have allocated quite a large sum of their grant to working with us local authorities about collections. So I attend those meetings, I will be there. We've actually taken them up the end of this year or the end of this financial year, and we're currently doing the food campaign, which they are funding. So we do work very, very closely with our colleagues at county because we have to, because they're the disposal, but also we're trying to get the same thing out of it, which is improved recycling and reduce waste going to Arlington. So yeah, we work very closely, and yes, the food. Yes, and yes, there is some money, so I am making sure I go to the meetings at the moment.
Okay. Councillor Turnbull, waiting patiently.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a few points and sort of, I think one or two maybe sort of thoughts on this, and then there's a couple which are a bit more sort of relevant and important, I think. But anyway, I'm quite surprised actually to hear from the speaker about this issue in Canterbury. I had no idea about that. And of course, being on the coast, and we're very pleased that our bins are being emptied, but I didn't realise the knock-on effect for Canterbury. And I'm very surprised that's not reported in this report, actually, especially given you have addressed it, or you are addressing it, you're looking for money to address it. It would have been good to have seen a report on this, an acknowledgement of this issue in this report, I think, and the measures that you're proposing to deal with it. And on the trial of the recycling bins along the coast, you mentioned that the results were disappointing and some materials, etc. There was contamination in there. There's no sort of there's no conclusion drawn from that as to whether you think that the bins were wrong, and you're going to try this again, or whether you just binned the whole idea and you're not going to do it again. You've given up on recycling on the coast. It would have been good to know a bit more about what's happening from that one. Shall I leave it there and do, or do you want to do them all at once? Okay. So a bit lower down. It's great that you provide for the community litter picks. That's a really good service. But I've done various ones of these, and we end up with a few bags. Everybody takes a big bag out, and they end up with very little in them. And so we end up with lots of plastic bags with tiny little bits of waste in them, and there's no recycling possibilities sort of built into it. I wonder if it'd be possible to use little reusable bags, which are then decanted into sacks. Certainly, some people have started using those. I think the Marine Environment Group on who do the West Beach Clean, I think they've started having some little bags which people, because you don't collect very much stuff if you're out on your own, and then you can chuck it all into the bags, so you get fewer plastic bags going in there. And also maybe provide some recycling bags, so that if we get because you get lots of plastic bottles, you get lots of tin cans, and they can all go into recycling rather than it all being bundled together. It feels a little bit, you're doing a good thing by doing the litter pick and you're clearing up the beach or the park, and yet you're actually not using good practice in terms of what you're doing with waste. So that was a thought. And then a sort of more fundamental one, when we get onto ground maintenance, there's nothing in there about biodiversity and biodiversity emergency. And I'm on the Open Spaces and Biodiversity Group, and one of the things that we are under the impression is happening is that there are links between what's happening there, the biodiversity strategy, and the way the council manages its open spaces. And I would have expected to see that I would expect to see that acknowledged in this report and measures being taken there. I seem to remember last year when we looked at the performance from last year, there was a lot of money which had been put aside for training on biodiversity for the staff, which hadn't actually been spent. It was about 100,000, I think, which you hadn't found an online training provision. So there's a feeling that this isn't really feeding through. We keep being reassured, and Martin Hall seems to be under the impression that these things are being, it is being fed through, and it is becoming a part of the way that you operate. And so it'd be really good to see that. There's, let me see, there was a BA18, I think, in the draft biodiversity strategy that Martin is working through. Is support contracts and Canenco's delivery of biodiversity positive grounds maintenance through provision of training, increased awareness and inclusion in development of management and site plans. So yeah, and a lot of, I get quite a lot of emails, and I'm sure others do, of Canenco have been, they've just raised to the ground something which is was providing a habitat for birds, or it's the wrong time of year to be doing this. And it would be good to see that you know that mindset about we've declared the biodiversity emergency. We know that these things need to be dealt with, and we are going to be responsible council in dealing with. Sorry, I'm going on quite a bit. And sustainable planting schemes, bulbs and perennials, perhaps, and shrubs rather than annual bedding plants.
Thanks for that, Councillor Temple. I think they've just run out of paper there. That should be all right, though.
Okay, I'm going to make a start, and I might look to David to fill some of the gaps in, but we'll go from there. So, yeah, the report acknowledging the event, yes, we'll note that for next year, that we need to be a bit more capturing of all of the sort of main issues that happened over the year. So we'll note that for next year's. The coastal side of things, the recycling litter bins, yes, we're not, we did put in a growth bid for recycling bins across the district, but because of the low success rate from last year and the council's financial position, that hasn't been supported. I do know that hasn't been supported for this next year, which then has a knock-on for the litter picks, because we have to dispose of litter recycling separately from household recycling. So we don't have, therefore, a disposal, a method to collect that separately and dispose of it and get it weighed separately. So we would unfortunately not be able to offer that facility for litter pickers. However, I love the idea of the reusable bags, and it's definitely something I will take away to talk to Lynn about, and we'll talk to Canenco about it as well. Lynn being the officer who organises, as you're aware, the community litter pickers. So I think that's a lovely idea. So yeah, we'll definitely look at that and then use the green bags for the end result of that. Good point on the biodiversity improvements and the service delivery plan. So I'm sure David will add to that section for next year, because also part of the work that we're looking to do is looking at different fuels for the large HGVs and things. So probably another lesson that we need to make sure that's a bit more developed within the service delivery plan for next year. Yes, we are working very closely with Martin and the team on biodiversity options for sites, what we can do. I'm not sure where you got with the training. I thought some training had it. Okay. But yeah, from the report side of things, we'll add those for next year, definitely.
If I can just add a couple of bits to that, and I take on board the point about biodiversity within the report. I think there's elements where, since we started and took over the GMOR contract, the biodiversity element has always been a relevant part of what we do. So almost by definition, we treat it as business as usual. So we don't identify it separately, because some of the areas that you covered there, so things like the training, we might have made reference to the training. We just see it as a training rather than identifying it separately, because it's coming from Martin and Martin's team. The training I think that Martin has funding for is now planned, and there I think we have some confirmed dates There's some confirmed dates for that pending. And the work that we're doing around sustainable planting and all those things, again, they're just coming into the business as usual decisions when we're submitting and we're talking about planting plans, and they're just being fed through the contract. So apologies, we don't identify them because they're just intrinsically linked to what we do throughout. And that's the same as Sarah said with regard to this looking at HVO and what we've done on the ground side, which is much more of a move away from petrol-based plant and looking at battery-operated or electric equipment. It's just getting that as a business as usual, sort of embedded in our DNA rather than highlighted separately, but we'll include something and do that better in the report.
Yes? No? Okay. I will just ask a couple of extra things if that's all right. I know we were talking about sort of summer bins earlier, but we've also got autumn leaves. There is quite, you do get quite a few letters and emails about this, like leaves that are all over the pavements and making them very slippery, because obviously the pavements, although not your responsibility, are quite uneven in places. And I think sometimes we need to look at that season as well. And then I noticed that the frequency of ground cutting or grass cutting is being reduced in some areas, I think, or it might not be. But if it is, what happens with the machines, like the machines during this period, and like the staff redeployed elsewhere? And I did have actually, I suppose going forward in the future, like one of the benefits, we were talking about that extended producer responsibility, or Councillor Brady was, and with the benefit that when the deposit return scheme comes in, hopefully the bins will be less full of glass and plastic and all sorts of things like that. But so my actual question would be, another question would be, you spoke about training the staff. So after the training, is there room for like career progression as well within the company? Thanks.
I'll do the first two, and I'll let David do the training and career progression side of things. So autumn leaves, we do have additional resource that come in to do autumn leafing. It's an actual longer period with Kanenko than it used to be with Serco. So we have already flexed that and have an extra machine in for a longer period. We have a list of areas that historically have required that extra leafing facility. So if councillors find there are other areas, we can look at that and see what we can do to flex it. But it is a limited resource. But yes, we do have the key areas covered. But if there are other areas that are seen, then if you pass them through, we can have a look at them for you. And grass cutting, we did look at potentially the option of reducing the grass cutting across the board as one of the budget changes. That's not been actually adopted. So what we will continue to do is work with Martin and his team to look at site-specific requirements, and where it is appropriate, reduce either part of sites or whole sites, and take them over to either 1, 2 or 4 cuts a year, so that you get the biodiversity benefit. Having said that, we've also purchased 2 new mowers for Kanenko, which are ride-on ones, so the council has to purchase them. And one of those at least has more flexibility with grass lengths and things. So we're hoping that will also help Kanenko be more flexible and potentially allow them to do a bit more flexibility to meet Martin's needs and things within the biodiversity thing. So hopefully that's, again, things that we're doing to improve things. I'll pass over to David.
Thank you. In terms of the training, what we've detailed in the report this year, or highlighted in the report this year, is within the sort of the supervisory team, certainly in sort of the middle management team and the senior management team, we've had a really quite a decent period of stability. So we've not had any vacancies that have been created on that, therefore those opportunities haven't existed. I'll come back to that in a moment. But what that has allowed us to do, and you'll see throughout the report, there's we've done an immense amount of training across all the services. And some of that is reinforcing some of those existing supervisory skills. I think in terms of opportunities, the opportunities are certainly exist for, and we have done, I think it's 4 to date now in terms of the driver apprenticeship scheme. So we've had a number of loaders who have taken that opportunity. They've undertaken that qualification, acquired that skill, and now they're frontline HGV drivers, having gone through that apprenticeship scheme. We are looking to sort of build on that. However, there is again a cost, and that is one of the things within the growth bid in terms of that commitment to the apprenticeship scheme. Other positions, since 2021, we have had a number of people that have been promoted internally and been promoted within. Any recruitment or any vacancy we have, we do advertise and recruit internally first. That's always a first port of call before going external. We always make those opportunities available. It's always better to grow your own.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think from my point of view, yeah, apprenticeships are just really important, and it gives people a chance and a foot on the ladder, and they get the proper training and everything. And you mentioned the HGV, and that's really good to hear. So thanks for that. And yeah, about the mowers with the different variable heights, so that will help with with the mowing and when it's wet, so you won't have to come out when it's really wet and then churn the ground up, because then you've got scope to leave it a little bit, hopefully. But anyway, thank you. Hold it. We've got, before I finish, we've got Councillor Brady.
Thank you, Chair. Can I come back on leaf collection? As we mentioned, biodiversity emergency and leaf deposits are ecosystems much needed for insects. Now, we understand that on pavements there is a public health requirement to collect these. Where do we deposit them? Is there a way that we can deposit them in open spaces to then create an ecosystem for much needed for insects? And what is the process? And maybe that's something for the biodiversity group to pick up, to find out if there are spaces around Canterbury that we can utilise to be able to help and have a habitat and improve biodiversity on that way.
I think it's something we can certainly take away and look at, but if we look at the general leafing that we collect as part of that cleansing activity, as you say, in those strategic routes, that is not taken to composting. The reason for that is that it's if it goes for composting, it's likely to contain materials that come from the road, so brake dust, tyre material, and therefore it's not acceptable. The street cleansing is not an acceptable income to those facilities. So my gut feeling would be we wouldn't want to then put that back onto the ground for those reasons in terms of utilising. We have an arrangement with our tree contractor, so things like where chippings and stuff like that, we put those back down, and we will chip cuttings and prunings, and we do chip that, and we do put that down. Certain locations there is a limit to how much you can put, otherwise we might be in danger of roses poking through 2-3 foot of mulch, but it is something that we do. It again probably fits that biodiversity angle. It's something that we do, and we just do, and probably don't tell a great lot of people actually what we are doing. Point taken.
Thank you. Just to come back, so obviously I understand the point on collections within roads and routes. If we have some local authority open spaces, do we then collect leaves there? Do we do that at a certain date, and can we leave them? So we leave them there, and
we don't clear leaves from open spaces. I mean, in terms of a resident, if they clear any leaves from their garden, they can put it into the subscription-based bin. So that option, and that's something that is encouraged through the T's and C's and the material that accompanies a garden waste subscription. And I think that information goes out fairly regularly on social media as well.
Yeah, I think we're finished. Yeah, just as a point, if I had my gardening hat on, I would be saying about the leaf collections. Yeah, I mean, they just take forever to rot down leaves into leaf mould. It's a lot longer than people take. And I think in like a woodland setting or like in parks and things, there could be other animals sort of hibernating in amongst the leaves. So it's maybe not always a good idea to collect them, but that's just my point of view. Anyway, back to business. We need to take a recorded vote on what I said a while back now. So if we could, would you like to repeat that, or are you okay? You okay?
Mr. recommends.
I would recommend. Well done.
Okay.
So I will repeat it. It's been a while. So I will propose this and. Go on. Sorry.
Sorry, just checking. So do our comments sort of summarised and passed to Cabinet? Is that kind of what happens? Thanks.
Yes. All your comments will be written in the minutes, which will obviously go to Cabinet, and your requests obviously will be in those minutes as well. Yeah, so it is there, and Cabinet receive the minutes and they read them when they consider the report. Okay?
Now can I ask Andrea to take a recorded vote on the earlier this item? Thank you.
Are you ready? Yeah.
Ready.
Okay. And that's carried unanimously, I'm pleased to say. Yay.
Right, we have now agenda item number 8, which was any other urgent business to be dealt with in public. We haven't got any other.
There is none.
And there is none.
Yeah.
And then, so the date of the next meeting, it will be 7 p.m. on Thursday, the 27th of November. There is no item number 10, and there's no item number 11 either. So we can now finish at 20 to 9. Thank you.